Well, welcome to our platform. Our platform is about getting people or encouraging people to tap into their gifts and their talents. With that being said, what is your gift that you bring to Brooklyn, New York?
Oh wow. So the gift that I bring, and it's taken me a while to, you have to listen to other people talk because if you kind of listen to your own noise, you sometimes don't realize what it is. But I think having selflessness be the best part of being selfish is something that I've lived by. And as I've gotten older, I realized it is a gift to want to do for others, sometimes more than you want to do for yourself. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to run for office. It wasn't something that I desired my whole life or grew up wanting to do, but I worked at Brookdale Hospital for the last 8 years and worked with some tremendous human beings, almost 4,100 employees, but 6% of our employees basically were living in shelters or cars because they couldn't afford to live in Brooklyn. And, I had a six-figure job at Brookdale. I was vice president, life was good, but I continually came home with this not guilt, but this desire to not leave my people behind and not come home to my house and be comfortable, but knowing people really were going through it. And that's the role I took on at the hospital. And then, COVID happened, and then it kind of exasperated all of the things that we see as a community. And it just came to me. It was like, you know what, why don't you run for this office? Because this office in particular, more than any other office, is really about putting people in connective communities or advocating for folks. It's not a full legislative job where you're going to write laws all the time, but it's really about going to Brownsville or Coney Island, Clinton Hill, and talking to people and getting to understand what's going on in their lives and how did you become that mouthpiece. So, if that's a gift, that's the best way I could define it, but it's really just about just wanting better for other people, knowing that I've been blessed, but really just wanting better for others.
Hey, man, it sounds great to me. McKnight, my co-host in politics, she's wants to ask you a question.
Thanks again, Carrie, for joining us. I know you're very busy with the primary being just June 22nd, this upcoming Tuesday, and early voting has already started. But word on the street is a lot of people are still very undecided on the Brooklyn Borough President race. People have asked us to ask the question is, what is your vision for the Brooklyn Borough President office?
Balance. A lot of people talking about equity, and it's really just bringing balance. I tell folks in Park Slope and in Bay Ridge, I don't want to take away the things that they've worked for in their lives, but what I really do want to do is kind of just balance or level the playing field a little, because when you look at communities in Bed-Stuy and Brownsville, East New York, Coney Island, Sheepshead Bay, our folks are suffering. And they're suffering in a way that we don't have to have them suffer. 1/3 of our homeless population, are children. And out of that 1/3, there's a family member who has a job. So when I was talking about the folks that I work with, 1199 union, DC 37 union, who have jobs, who have pensions, but can't afford to live in a borough, but living in shelters, it really just makes you understand how imbalanced our communities are. And, through all of this research, I was the healthcare guy because I was, a vice president at Brookdale, but doing all of my research and sitting down and really studying for this job with the expectation that I'm going to win, we can solve homelessness in 2 years. The city has enough money that they use between building homeless shelters, housing the homeless, and these temporary assistant vouchers that we can really put a roof over everyone's head and really solve something that is kind of like taking so many different administrations to deal with. And, even though I'm not running for mayor, the role is to really be able to work with the mayor. But, we sit down every week and we look at how do we solve this? How can we create this pathway? How can we open up these opportunities? And it really became something that, my vision is really just to create balance. I really don't want folks to really go hungry in East Brooklyn. If we talk about our Asian brothers and sisters who live in Bay Ridge, we think we have it bad. They're living almost 10 to apartments or one bedroom. And so there's a lot of conversations that I think that we don't have at the granular level. And so, that's really just my balance. Like I'm not going to be able to solve everything in 2 terms, but I'm sure going to chip away at enough of it that, after I'm done with this, people are going to say, you know what, Brooklyn is a place for everybody, not just for those who have, but for those who need a little more.
Thank you.
What are the key pillars of your administration?
Communication. The one good thing about not being a current elected official is that you have to go into every community and shake hands and listen to people and listen to what their needs are and understand how you can best serve them. And communication is a huge thing that, in some political realms, it's forgotten because, our leaders feel that they know already because they've gone through it. But there's so many similarities throughout the borough, but so many differences. And everything from food injustice to how people want healthcare, what's important to them, it's different. So the first thing is really sitting down and speaking to everybody. One of the things that I tell folks is that, Borough Hall is an amazing place to have events, and I'm definitely going to bring back the concerts and do all the cool things. But there's so many community board offices. There are also city council offices where I'm going to be in those communities every week. So on Monday, I'm going to be in Bay Ridge. Tuesday, I'm going to be, in Brownsville. Wednesday, so that folks don't have to travel to Borough Hall to kind of have the conversation or to find out what their needs are. We need to really be those folks on the ground. And the cool thing about being in the city government is like you're always here. You're not in Albany, you're not in DC. So that's the first thing I really want to do is to make sure that we do office hours in Brooklyn, not in Borough Hall.
I like that. Also, Mitchell-Lama buildings that are out there in Brooklyn. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in terms of they need more help, more access to money, and we hope that you can also facilitate that action in terms of helping people there in Mitchell-Lama building.
Yeah, I mean, between Mitchell-Lama and NYCHA, that's the last frontier of real affordability. And what has to happen is really not only on the advocacy level, not only using the platform, but it's also using the capital resources to kind of like improve roofs or, I want to be able to put compost stations by every NYCHA development, because when we talk about environmental protection and the amount of garbage that goes out, who's it affecting? The reason why we got rats, the reason why we got so much stuff in those communities, our communities, is because we don't really have the infrastructure. And utilizing that money that the borough president has, given every year by the city government, that's what they're supposed to do. Parks, schools, resources. Cynthia and I talk about it all the time, right? Schools need stuff. And how do we go about doing it? And the real way is doing it is by using that access.
Okay.
You two just said a lot of acronyms that our audience may not know. You mentioned NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, and Mitchell-Lama, which is an affordable, it could either be co-ops or apartments. It's one of the best kept secrets in the city, but I just wanted to just say that just in case there were any people who were like, what are they talking about? It sounds like another language. Moving on to that, what about your experience do you think makes you a good Brooklyn Borough President?
Yeah, and the thing about it is, Mitchell-Lama could really be should have been, or the first way of real home ownership for folks who, won't have the big houses and the yards, but really own their property. And, when I was at Gorman Jameson in Brownsville, a lot of folks have been paying a long time, not realizing they should own theirs by now. And so those again, it's just based off of communication and the education of what we can do and what we can't do. So that's why my first thing is to communicate with folks. This is what the job does. This is what we can do. This is what we can do together. And how do we get it done?
Thank
Okay.
you. And there, you talked about education. So there was another question we had is, will you continue Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams' legacy of supporting education through capital funding from the Brooklyn Borough President office?
Without question. And I'm gonna add to it a little bit. Eric did start a program where he paid for some school permits, right, to assist in that realm. And so again, studying this position, my job is going to, what I want to do is I want to pay for 10 schools per community board for their permits to be open from September to June. And what that allows, not-for-profits, enrichment programs to do is not worry about that expense of paying for permits. And so now if we want to talk about tutoring programs, if we want to talk about debate class, if we talk about anything, now all of a sudden you have 10 schools per community board where those doors are open, free and clear, thanks to the borough president's office. And what that will do, we're calling the program Something to Do, because what that program really does is also help take a lot of our kids off the corners, take them away from having idle time and putting them in the way that most of us grew up, right? Having, after school activities, even though the Bloomberg administration cut them and de Blasio hasn't really reinstated them, but we can do that from our own backyard and then support those groups to do that. Because, when you look at these dance classes or these young, bands that they do, or just tutoring programs, like there's so many untapped resources that we have, but people need space. And instead of being able to build a $2-3 million community center, our schools could be our community centers. So, I stole a little bit of it from Eric, but I'm expanded so that every district gets it.
That sounds good because it's needed. In addition to, I know Eric Adams put in a lot of money with technology, hydroponics. So it's great to hear that you are going to continue, but also expand. Another question comes about, there's a lot of concerns about development. And
That's true.
what is the Brooklyn Borough President role in development in Brooklyn?
Well, the borough president's role basically is, let me go back. So in 1975, the community board's ability to vote against projects was taken away. So right now they basically have an advisory role if certain projects come into the community to say, listen, we don't want it, we do want it. The borough president also has that same ability, with the exception of he gets an appointment to the public commission council or the public CPC. I'll get the acronym right. But what they do basically is vote on ULURP processes and say to the mayor, they think this project should go into ULURP, and ULURP is the Universal Land Review process. So what happens is a developer will come into the community and say, look, I want to build a 20,000 foot, building. And I'm going to present this to the community board. The community board is going to say, yeah, we like it, we don't like it. The city council person will say, yeah, we like it, we don't like it. Then the borough president will get a chance to say, yeah, we like it, we don't like it. Then it goes into something called the ULURP process. However, what's interesting is that if that city council person says that they don't really want the project, and the borough president and the community board, it still goes to a bigger portion, which is now the city council. So you may have a city council person in the Bronx voting in favor of a project that you don't want. And we saw that basically with the Sunset Park rezoning, the industry city rezoning, where most of the elected officials were voting that they wanted this thing. But, Carlos Menchaca didn't want it for his community, and nor did the community want it. So finally, luckily, the community won out. So in terms of that, that's the powers that the borough president has. But in most cases, you see folks come in and buy land and they call it as of right, because look, I built this land, I'm going to do what I want to do with it. But I told my wife in those instances, we're going to get a team of folks and we're going to tie ourselves to the land. And if the land is at an unaffordable reality for the community, then we have to protest. We can't just because you own the land, you come in and build and really displace our folks, right? Because the reality is gentrification only starts if there's displacement. Folks just don't come in and buy up land and buy your stuff up unless they're not people to live or occupy in it. So there's a lot of processes that the borough president's office has, but the advocacy of it, the recommendation, the yay or nays in terms of ULURP, which I think ULURP really needs to be redone. Also, just the 25 appointments he gets per community board is important too, because you want folks who are going to be part of the community in the organic sense, right? Not just folks that live there, but people who have businesses there, people who teach there. So in that respect too, the same screening processes that I've gone through millions of times over in Zoom, I'm going to put candidates who want to be part of the community board through that as well. Like if you want to be part of community board too, I'll get the application and I'm gonna turn the application over to the community members, and you guys screen them. And then if you want them, you recommend this is the right person for the community board. Because I think also what's happening over the years, there's a lot of great people that do work on the community board, but now it's become in some cases patronage or we'll rubber stamp this. And I think what happens is left out, most of our indigenous members of our community, but also left out the other peoples that make the fabric of the community.
That is correct. That's true. With that being said, what about homeless people that's homeless and the mental health issues that we have in Brooklyn and is run amok in Brooklyn?
Well, I'll start with the mental health, right? I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I'm going to just lift my arm up so y'all can see. This is how my blood sugar reads all the time. And I'm on a machine that pumps insulin in me. And so I've had diabetes since I was 4 years old. And, I tell folks, I always remember when the needles were this big, right? Now they're like, you can't even see them. And growing up, it was hard for me. Growing up, like I really had a hard time, like, dealing with this disease that I have and how it's going to affect me. And I tell folks, I'm a proud, mental health advocate. I'm a proud person who sat with someone to understand how to live. Like, there are times I wanted to kill myself because my sugars were too high and I couldn't see. And all of the things that Eric spoke about as a type 2 diabetic, I've lived with for 40 years. And so when you talk about mental health, the reality of it is first being able to get the help that you need to deal with it. And then now you add on all the other pressures. You are homeless. Or what if you're not homeless, but you just can't pay the bills and all of these things. And so we start to we kind of pigeonhole mental health and homelessness into one bucket where it's kind of a global thing. But to talk about the homeless conversation, first things first, like I said, 43% of our homeless population are people with jobs. So the first thing we have to do is get folks out of these homeless shelters, move around these voucher money so we can get folks with real roofs over their heads. Then that's going to alleviate so much of that. Then I talk about our single or mentally challenged homeless population, the ones that we see sitting on the corner, the ones begging for your cars. Now, once we vacated some of those rooms in these homeless shelters, these like elaborate homeless shelters that have beds and bathrooms, we get those folks into there, right? We show them that you don't have to be warehoused. And, I'll tell a story. Like my son and I used to, when I was driving him to school at Brookdale, we always passed down Eastern Parkway. And there's a guy on Eastern Parkway on the northbound side that built an elaborate kind of tent for himself, and one day we had all of these clothes and we had all this food. And I was like, let's just stop off and try to take care of the brother. And the first thing he said to me is like, what do you want? And I was like, I don't want anything. We have slippers, we see you here all the time. And he was just like, thank you. And I was just like, well, why don't you go into the shelter? He's like, the shelters are dangerous for me. He's been attacked, he's been raped, he's been, he can have disease. And this was before COVID. And so I realized that, our homeless population aren't only in drugs or have mental health. They're people who just want to be safe. So the thought process is that we spend $1 million to build these elaborate family shelters, get these families out of that, get them permanent homes, get these individuals off the street. And now you have a bathroom, you have a bed, you have decency, but on the first and second floor, and this is a real economic engine that we don't talk about, is rather than you waiting for a counselor or somebody to supervise you coming from Albany or Manhattan to check up whether you're taking your medication or whether you're doing that, we create educational and healthcare portals on those first and second floors. So what does that do? That you basically have folks who are getting their treatment, getting supervised on a daily basis, And then also getting them taught life skills, getting them taught the GED program, and giving them some sense of normalcy, because that in itself would alleviate so much of the mental health, because I think people don't realize stress is something serious, right? Stress creates a lot of mental health. And again, not being able to solve everything, but really having a plan to really address where we can start to defeat most of this stuff. And now we can look at the other pieces of it. But my homeless plan is really to kind of just get our working homeless out of the shelters, and now getting these folks who are sitting on these streets, who are begging, getting them some type of real help and continual help, not just some medication on a Thursday and sending them out to not to know how to handle themselves, getting them clothes, things like that, which is within our budget, was really within our city budget. And lastly, really, and this is more on the educational side too, but there's no Wi-Fi, there's no broadband in homeless shelters, and yet you got family, you have children who are in there. So there's a lot of somebody told me about the fundamentalist theory, right? You need to make sure that there's crime, so you always have police and judges, but you don't need to have a lot of crime. And I think there's a balance that we can really change people's lives if we just pay attention to putting people first in this instant.
That's what you're articulating, balance. I like that. Balance.
And before we close out, why should people rank you number one for Brooklyn Borough President?
Well, I think because I am, and not taking anything away from my competitors, right? But I've lived every aspect of what I'm trying to represent. Again, I am a type 1 diabetic. I know what lack of health access is. I know that in order to really create a place of a healthy community, you have to have that education through the hospital. One of the first pieces of legislation that I want to put in is that since 2006, we have not built 3 and 4 bedroom apartments with city or state money. And what does that mean? Is that, if Cynthia and I just met and we were a happy, loving couple and we decided we want to have a child, the minute we have a child, we have no place to go. And there's so many young families that I've met that are like, we've already gotten too big for our 1-bedroom apartment. And so I use that thought process because, before I'm only married 3 years, but I have 3 children, my 86-year-old dad and my wife to be, and we had a fire in our home and lost everything. And we were all displaced. And we couldn't even stay together. We couldn't find an Airbnb, a hotel, or even some kind of like-sized dwelling to make sure we were all right. And we both had jobs. So you imagine with somebody who is 1 income, 4 kids, what they're going through. And then we talk about our public safety. We talk about our gun violence issues. The unfortunate part about working at Brookdale was, my first 2 years, we had 255 gunshot victims in a year. And my 12-year-old son at the time was almost a victim of gun violence coming home from school. And so I started a program called It Starts Here to address that, to bring in children, to talk about the community. So it's kind of like I've lived every aspect of it. And, and I won't lie to you, like I know that I would be an okay city council person because I had to sit there and do laws and legislation, and I'd be a good state senator. But I know I'd be a great borough president, because by being a borough president, we have to talk, we have to connect. I have to connect Duke to Cynthia, right? In order for us to grow. And I've lived my life connecting so many people, and I tell the story about my first job in politics is with Assemblyman Nick Perry. And 2 weeks into the job, I got a phone call. Well, I was only supposed to go to meetings for him. One day I was in the office and I wasn't supposed to answer the phone because I didn't have a script. And Assemblyman Perry is very particular about how people answer the phones, what you say, because, every constituent matters. And in this particular day, I answered the phone. And on the other side was Miss Owens, a senior from Clarendon Road. And they say, you always remember your first. In politics, constituent service, you always remember your first. And she was on the other side of the phone crying hysterically because Con Ed had cut off her lights. And I panicked and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wasn't supposed to answer the phone. And I hung up and I instinctively called Con Ed and I pleaded my case to them. And then they came back and said, thank the Assemblyman for his advocacy and his leadership. We're going to turn the lights back on. And I was like, wow, like that is what a public servant's supposed to do. That's And so I wanted to do that. And so I spent the rest of my career learning the craft, living the craft, but knowing how to connect the pieces. And like I said, if it wasn't for COVID, if it wasn't for working next to these wonderful people who just didn't have someone advocating for them on the level that I feel that they needed, I wouldn't have run. I would have stayed with my nice job, and my wife would have been a little less upset with me that I'm, cleaning out all of our savings. But it's really just something, that it's something that just has been important to me. And I'm looking forward to the success. I'm looking forward to changing Brooklyn in a great way. But I'm really enjoying the journey too. I'm really enjoying meeting so many people. I think, Cynthia, you and I crossed paths, but we haven't even been as close since, I started running. And that's the beauty of just being able to do things like that, to learn and to grow with folks.
I want to thank you.
I want to ask him one question before you leave. Just one question. For people, this ranked choice voting is new to a lot of people, especially to seniors who don't really understand. Can you explain simply in terms what is ranked choice voting? I understand it to be that I could even vote for you twice, first and second time, and vote for whoever I want to, third, fourth, and fifth. But I would love you to for you to explain that. Ranked choice voting.
Well, the one thing you shouldn't do is vote for me twice, because what they haven't told a lot of people is that if you put the same candidate 1 or 2 or 3, then it kind of disqualifies your ballot. And I don't think they've done enough education in that respect. You can rank me 1 and then skip to 3 and not do 2. That those things are fine. I'm still a little, I'm gonna be fully honest. I am still a little skeptical of this ranked choice voting, because of the reality that, one, we didn't do a great job rolling it out. We, especially our seniors, especially the people who have been in tradition, who fought for voting, who knows what voting is. It's that way. One senior lady told me, she made me laugh. She's like, so you're trying to tell me that if I see 2 boyfriends and I don't like the first one, I could pick the other one? And I was just like, yeah, technically you could if that's the case. So I'm like, I never thought about it that way. But the ranking really is, to me, more of an economic issue, because usually if you don't get 40% of the vote in a primary, there's a runoff between the top 2 candidates, and that costs the city another X amount of dollars. So what this system does, it gives you the ability to still vote for who you want, but just in case your person doesn't win, it gives you a second chance. And then the way they're selling it is to say you still have a hand in electing who you want. And that's what I said. I don't really buy all of that. And it's a complicated math system. So if we use us 3 right here on the screen, and, Duke, you get, 40% of the number 1 votes, and, Cynthia gets 20% and I get 6, I fall off first, right? So I'm no longer in contention. However, if all of my 6% votes, my number 2 votes are for Cynthia, she now moves up to 26%. And then you have to see who's on the third thing. So the math gets very interesting about it. But I tell folks, look, go with your gut, go with your heart, pick your number 1. And if there's somebody else that does not move you for number 2, you're in every right to not do that, because you don't want to say, oh, I'm going to pick this person or that person just to fill a box. And then all of a sudden it's like, that's not the person you want to represent. So, I am praying very hard that, on Tuesday, or the following Tuesday after that, however they do the calculations, I get 50% plus 1, or I get enough number 2s to take me over the top. But it's a very complicated process. And so there are a lot of folks that are just going to vote for 1, because that's how we grew up. It's like, yeah, that's the person I like, and let's keep it that way. But it's here to stay. And I think, beyond just like what we did with the census, we got to teach folks about ranked choice voting. And I think, but the hardest part of it is that when you go in that ballot box, like I haven't gone yet, but I'm hearing horror stories because you have 8 candidates for mayor, that you get to pick 5 from. Then you have 13 candidates for borough president, which you get to pick 5 from. And so after a while, it's just fatigue, and folks don't even want to do it. So after they get past their first 1 or 2, you know, like me personally, I'm going 2, maybe for mayor, because there's 2 folks that I really like that I know. And then that's it, you know, and I like myself a borough president, so that might be it, you know, but it's an interesting reality though. But it's going to be fun to see how it really turns out.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping onto our platform, Anchored with Grace. And a lot of people are going to be watching this, and hopefully this will take you over the top.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. So, you know, y'all toasted earlier. So hopefully that toast is for me on Tuesday. But thank you so much for this. This was fun. This is the stuff that I love to do. I told Cynthia, look, I love this kind of stuff. So next time, maybe you'll be on person. I'll be on the other side. Y'all just, you know, but I appreciate the time, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going door knocking now.
Wonderful.
All right. See you soon. All right. Bye.